Very much, Lucy. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today for Centrica's Climate Transition Plan briefing. As I was just saying, this is a very timely opportunity to touch on an incredibly important topic for both companies and investors, and of course the economy as a whole. I'm Mike Tyrrell. I'm the editor of SRI Connect, and my job today is very simple. All I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce the call, to tell you importantly that it's being recorded, and then to invite and instruct you on how to ask questions. You can ask questions at any point during the presentation. If you could do that using the chat window at the bottom of your screen, that would be fantastic. You can direct those questions either to everyone, in which case everyone will see them, or just to me, Mike Tyrrell. When it comes to the question session, after about 20 minutes of the company's presentation, I'll be grouping them into categories to make the best use of your and their time. So with that, I'm going to finish the introduction. I'm going to hand over to Jim Rushen of Centrica to introduce his team and to take us through his presentation on Centrica's climate transition strategy. Over to you, Jim.
Thanks, Mike. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for your time this afternoon. It's great to see so many of you on the call. We're going to get straight into the agenda. If my technology works. There we are. So on the agenda today is to take a look at Centrica's climate transition plan. I'm going to give an overview of the plan and do a deep dive into our climate targets and also some key areas in our plan, such as the just transition and the governance that we have in place. And then after that, we'll have plenty of time for Q&A. Now, my name is Jim Rushen. I'm the Group Head of Environment for Centrica, and I'm joined by two of the Centrica team, Abby Robbins, our Responsible Business Director, and Martin Espley, our Head of Investor Relations. Now, I'm sure many of you know Centrica, but we're obviously a leading energy services and solutions company. Our strategy is very much driven by our purpose to help our customers to live sustainably, simply, and affordably. When we do that for over 9 million customers, both residential and business, mainly in the UK and Ireland. And we do that through brands, very well-known brands such as British Gas, Bord Gosh in Ireland, Centrica Business Solutions. And we're supported in that by 20,000 staff, some 7,000 of which are engineers and technicians in customers' homes and businesses, and that we invest heavily in through things like our 4 award-winning training academies in the UK. So, as a leading energy company, we see that we have a great opportunity, but also actually a responsibility to shape a fairer and more sustainable future. And that is why last year we published our People and Planet Plan. This is our long-term sustainability plan. It contains our ambitions in areas that we think we can make most positive impact. And also areas that we know our stakeholders are interested in and concerned about. Now, last year, we followed that up in November with our first climate transition plan. So this really sets out in much more detail the things we're going to do as a business to deliver on those ambitions, really to show that there is substance behind the headlines, if you will. And that's what I want to take you through today. So first point I want to make sort of contextually really is that corporate climate transition plans are still quite novel. I think when we published ours, only 19 of the FTSE 100 had published climate transition plans, and there's been only a smattering since. So it's quite novel, and we engaged very, very heavily with our stakeholders, including the investor community, but also our unions, our colleagues, etc. To understand what was expected of the plan and what good practice looked like. And so we thought long and hard about what was in the plan. You can see through the content list here, that we take the opportunity to explain how we think about climate change and our role in mitigating it. We put aside a lot of the document to detailing how we're going to deliver on the targets, but also loud and clear, we needed to cover off the just transition. And I'll get into that in more detail. And then, of course, covering governance and indeed our approach on climate advocacy. I also, by way of context, wanted to just touch on our demeanour as it is to climate and the energy transition. You know, we're very open that we don't have all the answers today. We don't know what pathways will play out. We don't know all the answers that are needed for the energy transition. I would be very suspicious if anybody told you they did. But we do have, over 200 years of history as a company. This is not the first energy transition that we've experienced. And we think we've got a significant opportunity to play a leading role, to be a pragmatic voice, to help our customers and society more generally to progress. We also took the opportunity to, really lay out that we don't think it's going to be a smooth transition. And, I think the last few months and indeed the last 2 years really have shown us that. There's going to be difficult choices to make. There's going to be bumps in the road. And, at times we're probably going to be seen to be going a bit slowly, maybe backwards sometimes, but we are going to be always very focused on the end goal. And I think we need just an honest dialogue as we and others try and navigate this transition. And you can see that captured in the words of our CEO there, Chris O'Shea, who was very heavily involved in the climate transition plan. Now, the final point I wanted to make before getting into the detail was our targets and our plan is very much underpinned by our understanding of the macro trends that will drive the energy transition. And we've deepened our understanding of these trends just recently, actually, through our work on the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures. We have now complied with the TCFD. So our understanding of these kind of trends are growing. And just briefly, we can see just an ever-increasing focus on the environment. Our key markets of the UK, Ireland, Europe, North America, they are setting some of the most ambitious NDCs. And indeed, companies that we want to partner with, people who want to work with us, are putting sustainability higher up on their agendas. It's a growing issue, of course. We know there's going to be a transition away from fossil fuels, but there will be an emergence of lower carbon alternatives, such as low carbon power, hydrogen, and we can see a significant growth in the need for renewable power generation as we electrify large parts of the economy. That in turn is going to drive a continued requirement for decentralized solutions, energy optimization, and of course something that can't be sort of pushed enough, and that is energy efficiency, the constant need to try and use less and to use smarter energy management technology. So these and other trends, but these are the key trends that underpin our thinking in this space. What I want to do now is to get into the detail of our targets themselves. So I'll start with our climate targets. So we set two fundamental climate targets. One is to be a net zero business by 2045, which I'll get into in a bit more detail, and also to get our customers to net zero by 2050. Before I get into those in detail, I just wanted to show the donut on the right, which is basically our value chain greenhouse gas emissions. I think it just provides a context of our footprint as a PLC. So very briefly, you can see the Centrica's emissions, that's our scope 1 and 2, are about 2 million tonnes today. And actually, we've reduced those by over 80% over the last 10 years. So they've become significantly smaller piece of the pie. We have other supply chain emissions at about 5% of our total. But then really the big story is our scope 3 use of sold product. That is our customers' use of electricity and gas that we sell them. And you can see there that's about 90% of our entire value chain. That is why we're so focused on the customer and we have our scope 3 targets. So now I'll focus on our scope 1 and 2 target to be a net zero business by 2045. Last year, we pulled that forward by 5 years. We set an intermediate target of 40% reduction by 2034. So you can see the graph on the left here. This is our latest emissions forecast all the way out to 2050. It's actually a recent graph. So we updated our climate transition plan probably about 2 weeks ago now. And that is because having announced the sale of our Norwegian assets from our upstream joint venture Spirit Energy and the retention of the UK and Dutch assets, we fully incorporated those emissions. And that's the hydrocarbon production element you can see there. And so this is a new glide path, but the key is that our targets remain unaffected by that. And I just want to say a couple of words on how we've approached target setting. So you can see here that our targets are dominated by the hydrocarbon production, the deep blue, but also power generation. And there are also road fleet and property emissions in there as well. Now, to understand the kind of targets we need to set, we have used the Science Based Target Initiative available model to model what different temperature pathways look like for us and for our portfolio. So we've used their SDA pathways where they have them, for example, for the electric utilities. Where they're not available, such as for hydrocarbons, we've drawn another good practice, such as the IIGCC's oil and gas standard. Some of you may know the IEA as well. So there are not fully accepted pathways for all parts of our portfolio, but we try and understand what good looks like out there, what best practice is. And from that, broadly, we know that for the next for this decade broadly, we're around the well below 2 pathway, probably slightly better than, but then we accelerate progress and we very firmly get to the 1.5 degree. And of course, we are absolutely complying with the sort of net zero requirement, being net zero by 2045. And another important point to make is that you can see there, we're very focused on carbon abatement. So if we do what we want to do, we will reduce our emissions by about 99%. So we're not going to rely heavily on carbon removals or neutralization. Now, how are we going to deliver on those targets? Well, we have plans in place across all those 4 categories of emissions. So on the power generation, in our climate transition plan, we announced a new target to build an 800 megawatt portfolio of battery, solar, peaking assets that'll help us decarbonize our and the sectors, the power sector's emissions. We're also exploring options to either wind down or extend our large-scale power asset in Ireland, Whitegate. There, it's either going to be sort of end of life mid-30s, or we're hoping to extend the life through maybe carbon capture and storage, or using hydrogen. And on hydrogen, we've also started to make some small investments in hydrogen production, such as our investment in High Rock. That could be a future fuel which will help decarbonize power, of course. Now, on the hydrocarbon production side of things, those UK and Dutch oil and gas assets, primarily gas that we've retained, we've made the statement that we're not going to invest in any further exploration of new hydrocarbon reserves. So we're going to enter a runoff strategy, so wind down the existing reserves over broadly the next 10 years or so. But equally, we want to pursue opportunities to convert some of those assets to play a longer term role in the transition, such as storing clean hydrogen or carbon. On the fleet side of things, we announced a target to electrify our entire UK fleet by 2025. It's an area that I think we're absolutely showing leadership in. We placed the UK's largest order of 3,000 vehicles last year. We've launched EV schemes for our colleagues, for them to either have company cars or private cars, electric only, and we've deployed EV chargers across the workplace. So we've got great plans there to decarbonise that. We have the 3rd largest fleet in the UK, so that is meaningful. And on property, we use the technology that we actually offer our customers, such as CHP, biomass, batteries, LED, solar. And we've been deploying that in our estate. We've reduced our emissions by about 70% in the last 8 years, but we're aiming for another 50% reduction in our property emissions by 2030. And our flexible working approach post-COVID is going to help with that as well. So really that is on a page, the headlines of the plans we intend to decarbonise our scope 1 and 2. If I now move to the customer target, so over 90% of our scope 3, we've set a target to help our customers to get to net zero by 2050 with a midterm target of 28% reduction by 2030. And we measure this as the carbon intensity of the energy that we provide our customers. So on this one, we of course have much less control over these emissions. We can influence it, of course, but we do rely on other actors such as government, such as the customer themselves, of course. However, we maintain internal models of plausible pathways that we could see playing out to decarbonise our customer base. And sort of illustrated on the graph on the left here, we can see, for example, a high hydrogen pathway, which is the blue line, a high electrification pathway. And we would like to actually be, in that curve, somewhere between the blue and the yellow out to around 2050. That is kind of shapes our engagement with government. Of course, what we're trying to avoid is a lack of policy, a lack of support, a lack of the frameworks we need to deliver decarbonisation, say, of heat, which would ultimately, play out the red line. That is what we want to try and avoid. But we know the first phase, with high confidence, is going to be about decarbonising power. And indeed, for the last 2 years, we've offered our customers zero carbon electricity in the UK. So we're actually ahead of target there, although that regime is under review. So we're working with government on that. The second phase, if the first was about decarbonising power, standing up low carbon heating solutions, the second phase is very much about decarbonising heating. That's why the electrified, the hydrogen-based scenarios are so important. So even though we don't know exactly what will play out, we do know how we're going to help our customers, and you can see that on the right. It's through energy efficiency and optimization, through helping them generate and store their own renewable energy, providing them with cleaner energy, and allowing fuel switching. So gas boilers to heat pumps, for example, or petrol and diesel vehicles to electric vehicles. So that's the theory. So what are we doing about actually delivering on that promise? Well, from a B2C perspective, so domestic customers, we already have a very broad range of low carbon technologies that we're offering them. So sticking with those themes I just went through, energy efficiency, such as home insulation, smart metering, we're a leader in the deployment of smart meters. We have software that we've developed. We're running virtual power plant trials, running demand side response, aggregating it over hundreds of homes. We've got solutions for generation and storing renewable energy, batteries, smart tanks, etc. We already provide award-winning green tariffs. And then, as I mentioned on heating, we're already deploying hydrogen-ready boilers. They can run on a hydrogen blend. And in our climate transition plan, we set out plans to ramp up air source heat pump installations to about 20,000 a year by 2025. Hive heating customers, we're hoping to get up to 2.5 million. And on EV charging, up to 100,000 per annum by 2025. So you can see there's a lot of content in the climate plan around these key technologies that are going to help us deliver on that target. And then just briefly switching to the B2B customer base, we have a whole range of solutions and services for the business community, but I think it's actually best summed up on this slide, which is it's our net zero sort of pathway package that we have for customers. So we have an end-to-end solution across power, heat, road transport, where we can provide net zero consulting for the business, including setting science-based target for that business. And then energy efficiency packages, converting to low carbon technologies such as solar, heat pumps, battery storage, etc. And then also underpinned with greener tariffs. It could be renewable PPAs, all the way through to offsets. And actually, we've underpinned it with a recent guarantee that we're going to provide our B2B customers with zero carbon electricity and a range of light green to deep green tariffs. So that's a proper off-the-shelf, end-to-end solution to net zero to help our B2B customers go on that journey. So now I'm going to slightly change gear and talk about the just transition. In engagement with stakeholders, it is very clear that there is concern that the energy transition, must not exacerbate existing inequities such as, fuel poverty, digital divide, etc. And we are absolutely behind that. We want to be a leading voice in ensuring that the energy transition is actually fair and equitable for all. We actually think we know our customers better than anyone. And so we want to be their voice. We want to champion the customer, as shown by comments there from our chairman. So to do that, in the climate transition plan, we developed and we launched our new Just Transition principles. So these are going to guide our actions going forward, shape our thinking, and very simply, they are to minimize harm and maximize benefits for people in the transition, and to ensure that no groups are left behind as we go on that journey. And we've got 4 key areas of focus. Firstly, customers. We think deeply about what are the impacts on customers with regard to the adoption of transition technologies, and who pays. On colleagues, We've got a great focus on moving our employees to high carbon roles to lower carbon or green jobs, and driving diversity as we do so. On communities, we're undertaking community level action to try and inspire and enable communities to take action at that level. And of course, on our supply chain, we're stepping up our engagement with our partners, our suppliers, to manage those social and environmental risks in our supply chain. And I think we're making great progress. So on the customer side of things, we've contributed over £130 million through the British Gas Energy Trust, up more than 500,000 people since 2004. And actually in December, we increased our winter fund fuel by £6 million as a direct response to the current cost of living crisis. On colleagues, we set out plans in our climate plan and People and Planet targets to recruit 3,500 smart energy apprentices by 2030. That's almost a person for every day for the next decade. And we have an aspiration for 50% of those to be women. We're really trying to drive a diverse workforce to reflect the communities that we serve by 2030, and a big focus on cross-skilling our employees into green jobs to create the engineer of the future. On communities, we have a fantastic Energy for Tomorrow fund, up to 600,000 to spend annually, targeting investment, job creation. And of course, we're also trying to volunteer more and more as a business. We're in the target to volunteer 100,000 volunteering days by 2030. And just on supply chain, we have a responsible sourcing strategy. But just recently, we've established a requirement for all large contracts to have a net zero commitment. The partner organization must have a net zero commitment and publish a carbon reduction plan. So trying to sort of influence and extend and show leadership and inspire others and help them to do that. And we have a supplier charter, ESG assessments for higher risk suppliers. So as you can see, I think we're doing a lot in the just transition space. And then my final slide is on governance. It is, of course, an incredibly important subject. And, I just want to be clear that we have very good board oversight of all of our plans. I spent a lot of time with our board. They were very involved in the development of the climate transition plan, and we have ongoing tracking of our performance at that level. Last year, we looked at board capability. We looked at our skills matrix. We actually increased our board bench strength on climate change. We provided net zero training. And now, of course, we're proposing to integrate climate KPIs into our exec REM policy. On advocacy, something we heard loud and clear from the investment community was around climate-related advocacy. And so in our climate transition plan, we announced that we would conduct all of our direct advocacy in line with our climate goals and the Paris Agreement, and that we would assess all of our indirect advocacy through trade bodies and the like, and we would publish annually to much greater degree than we do today on what we find and the actions we've taken if there's any misalignment. And so we're actually putting the process in place right now to make that happen internally. And finally, on disclosure, we always try and be a transparent organization. And we've been reporting to things like CDP for well over a decade. We're an A-rated company, and CDP have been for a number of years. And as I mentioned before, we just published our first fully compliant TCFD report in our annual report, which again, is just our continual desire to be an early adopter of good practice. So that is all I'm going to take you through on the slides. So I'll come off presenting, and I think me and the team are very happy to take any questions that you might have.
Thank you very much indeed for a very comprehensive presentation, Jim, and one that I'm sure will give rise to a lot of questions. I mean, if nothing else, I've got plenty, but it's been a while since I've covered the sector, so I'd strongly encourage company research providers and asset managers who either hold the company or indeed cover the company to start posting questions in the chat window. And then we will take them in groups or, as they come through. And we already have one in from Connor Constable of Perk, who asks whether you will have trouble achieving SBTI, so science-based targets, verification on these targets, given that the majority of your emissions are scope 3 and that the relevant medium-term target is intensity-based. So there's quite a lot in that question. You can have a go at it, and then I'll pick up any bits that may or may not have been missed.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, no, thanks for the question. I thought Science-Based Target Initiative would come up, and it's a good question. So let me start with an update on where we are with Science-Based Target validation. So you may have read in our climate transition plan that we, in the run-up to COP, we joined the Race to Zero campaign. And as part of that, we committed to have our targets validated by the SBTI. Now, two things have happened since then, which are relevant to this answer. Firstly, as I mentioned, we have confirmed the sale of our Norwegian assets from Spirit Energy, but also the retention of the UK and Dutch assets. That is why I showed you that graph earlier. So we're now fully bringing those oil and gas, hydrocarbon production emissions into our targets and into our GHG inventory. The second thing that happened is SBTI, as you may know, are trying to develop their own oil and gas standard. That is proving more complex and requiring more time than they initially thought. So they've come out with a policy to say that they will not validate the targets of any company that has any level of involvement in gas or oil production. So I've not spoken with the SBTI directly since they announced that, but I think the biggest barrier of getting validation is the delay in their guidance, and we've got to go at their pace. We will be in discussion with them. You know, we're monitoring that very closely, and we remain keen to resolve that. In terms of the intensity target, the last time we had a discussion with them, and I believe their sort of guidance will corroborate this. They do accept a carbon intensity scope 3 reduction target, but it needs to enable an absolute reduction as well, which ours does. So I don't actually have a concern about our scope 3 target being an intensity target. So hopefully that answers the question.
Do come back. If not, Connor, we don't have any more questions. So please, I would encourage people to post them. If not, I think, could I pick up on a couple of points there? Firstly, so I'm slide 11 is where I'm just living at the moment. It is that phase 2, the change over what we need for heating. That is an intensity target. What assumptions do you make in that graph about volumes? So is that an intensity target with energy volumes going up hugely, or is that do you assume that energy volumes are coming down significantly? So what would that look like as an absolute target?
Yeah.
And then my second question, on that slide is, there's clearly a substantial difference between zero emissions by 2047 and 90 grams of CO2 per kilowatt hour by 2050. So between the worst case scenario and the hydrogen or electricity scenario, could you give us some tangible examples of both the risks and the opportunities that the high hydrogen or high electricity scenario presents to Centrica?
Yeah, of course. I'm just going to come back to your picture, Mike. I think I've got all that. So let me deal with the first one. So you're asking what assumptions lie behind the intensity target. Let me be clear first. The reason why we set an intensity target for the scope 3 customer use of products sold is because we need to normalize for fluctuations in our customer base and therefore our customer consumption. So I'm sure you can all recognize that we occupy a very dynamic market, and customer numbers can go up and down quite a lot. Indeed, we've just taken on 700,000 new customers through the supplier of last resort process. And so if we just had an absolute target, our glide path would yo-yo all over the place. And additionally, we actually intend as a company to grow our customer base. We're hungry for more customers. But that is a good thing in our book, because we believe that if we actually deliver on our target to provide cleaner and cleaner energy, then people joining Centrica is going to be good for the planet, and we'll actually be providing them with cleaner energy and more solutions to actually reduce their energy use through efficiency and optimization. And indeed, we know that those 700,000 customers that we took on from the supplier of last resort, we actually are providing them with cleaner energy than the failed suppliers. That's just one, example. So there is a good reason why we go for an intensity target. Now, I think you said, Mike, what's the assumption in there in terms of volumes? Built into our target is our desired growth of customers. Therefore, built in is a growth of consumption, but also built in is the efficacy of our sort of ability to provide them with energy efficiency measures and cleaner energy as well. So whilst volumes are going up, the intensity is coming down hard as well. And so actually net as an absolute, you're going to be seeing a good sort of circa 20% reduction as well from an absolute perspective.
I'm actually going to stop you on my second question because it's actually not about me, and the questions are coming in thick and fast now. So if we have time, I'll take my question. But we have a question from Jess Williams at Columbia Threadneedle. And could you elaborate on Centrica's thoughts on hydrogen's role in heating? And then maybe P.S. Srinivasan, I'll take two together. How is the new gas boiler ban from 2025 expected to impact Centrica's growth expectations?
Yeah. Okay. Grand. They're very related. So hydrogen role in heating. We're on record saying that we're sort of technology agnostic when it comes to the pathways to decarbonize heating. And by that, we mean we can see that there is going to be a role for both hydrogen-based solutions and electric-based solutions. And I made the comment on an investor call the other day, us being technology agnostic does not mean we're net zero agnostic. We're very much not. We want to be able to drive the transition. It's just that both technologies are going to be needed, and we are building capabilities for both and see opportunity for both. So just on this, it's hard to talk about hydrogen without talking about electrification because they're the sort of two sides of the coin, really. But specifically on hydrogen, we believe that hydrogen will play a role in decarbonizing heating. The government are, of course, showing some strong signals around supporting hydrogen production. Their latest, British Energy strategy doubled the target for production, so 10 gigawatts by 2030. Now, we therefore believe that there's sort of the value chain will evolve in a certain way, and we're going to see hydrogen production initially used in the industrial sector to replace grey hydrogen. But it is very likely that there will be domestic and sort of smaller business use on a regional basis centered around hydrogen production hubs. Equally, there are going to be homes in the UK that are not suitable for the alternative, which is air source heat pumps, because frankly, they're too leaky or they're too difficult to get to the desired levels of insulation. And so therefore, they will be suitable for hydrogen heating. Whereas there will be lots of other buildings, and new builds in particular, they're better suited to heat pumps because of their high efficiency. So a mix of solutions, both viable, both need support, and we're involved in both. So, we've stood up our commercial heat pump business last year. So we're busy deploying heat pumps, particularly in local authority housing, I must say. And we're also, as well as that investment in hydrogen production, we're also involved in the hydrogen village trials, and we're in conversation with government around hydrogen storage. So all of the sort of nodes of the hydrogen value chain from production, storage to the demand side, Centrica is absolutely involved in it. And as a related question, the new gas boiler ban in 2025, we don't see that as a difficulty for Centrica because those homes are likely to require electric solutions, so air source heat pumps, and we're already offering those, and we want to be a market leader in those. So that doesn't cause us any heartburn at all.
Thank you. There's a question. I'm sorry, I can't. The name is Sharsha. I can't attribute that. It's not a full name, I don't think. So, is there any methodology used to establish any Scope 3 target? And does the company quantify key elements of different strategy with respect to the major sources of its emissions, including Scope 3 emissions? So that is a question on the chat. If you want to everyone on the chat, if you want the detail of it.
So I think there was almost two parts to that, Mike. I might ask you to repeat the second one when I've dealt with the first. I think the first one was, what's the methodology of setting our Scope 3 target? So again, we start with the Science Based Target Initiative and their models and their standard, and also others in terms of what does good look like? What's the best interpretation of what science requires in terms of the pace of decarbonisation, but also as Science Based Target Initiative do they recognise the sort of the less control that a business has over its Scope 3 emissions. So they recognise that actually it's sort of slightly less stringent. Sorry, was someone wanted to come in then? No? Sorry, I heard something in my headphones. So we start with what does good practice look like? And that gives us the glide paths for our customers' emissions on, say, a well below 2 or 1.5 degree pathway. That gives us a corridor within which we want to try and set a target in. The next task for us is to very much have a look at what our customer base looks like today, what the consumption patterns look like. And in very simple terms, we have emissions associated with the sale of electricity and emissions associated with the sale of gas. And we have put a lot of effort into playing a role in enabling renewable electricity to get to market. We are one of the leading signers of PPAs in Europe. So we're doing a lot to actually decarbonize the power part of the equation. And we have a forward plan in terms of how we think we can do that, at what rate. Then we think about the different pathways and different solutions for decarbonizing heating, which is everything I was just discussing about the hydrogen versus electrification. But we have a central model, and then we play sensitivities with it in terms of the scale of deployment and the pace that we think it can be deployed. And that then leads to our target setting, really. So what do we think the science requires? And what do we think we can do with our capabilities and our reach for our customers? Mash the two together, and that's where you get our Scope 3 target from. And there was a second part. I don't know if there's a second part, whether I covered that or not, Mike.
So it quantifies key elements with respect to major sources of its emissions. No, I think that's covered it. Sharsha, please do follow up if you want to, and we can open your line. I want to go back to a couple of questions. Andrew Mulder from Credit Sites asks one which picked up something earlier. Heat pumps are not something the average wage earner can afford. So how do you see the take-up of heat pumps being promoted, and who pays if there is some form of subsidy? Does it get spread across the bill of all customers?
Yeah, I mean, the fact that the lower carbon solutions, such as heat pumps, are significantly more expensive than the incumbent technology is one of the big barriers to decarbonising heat. That is why the decarbonising heat is going to take more time than decarbonising the electric side of the equation that I just discussed. Heat pump upfront costs can be 3 times the cost of a gas boiler. And even without, or even before the current cost of living crisis, that was not going to be something that everybody across our customer base could afford, clearly. So we've always been supportive and have engaged government on the fact that there needs to be grants to address that upfront cost. There's a couple of levers we think can be pulled and we've put to government. One is upfront grants. That should be centrally funded to help with that capital cost. But also then in terms of running cost, we've also been quite clear that we think that the policy costs that currently sit on electricity should be put onto general taxation. People are paying 3 times the amount for electricity than they are gas. We need that to be resolved. Otherwise, electrified low carbon solutions are just not going to be cheap enough to run. So again, that's another lever that we're quite keen that government act on. Put it on general taxation though, rather than put it on gas. Put it on the bill and it's still regressive for those who are least likely to pay. The more that you pay, as a proportion of your income on energy, the worse off you are. That's why we think a lot of these costs need to go on general taxation.
Thank you. And I don't want to, we are skipping around a bit, but there's a question from two actually from very early on in the call. So from Elchin, gas sales represent 68% of Centrica's emissions. Can you explain in more detail how you're going to reduce emissions from gas sales in the midterm? And what about the emissions related to gas trading? So I think you've covered some of that, but maybe if there's anything you want to add.
I won't repeat myself so we can have other questions come in. So hopefully some of what I said before will ring true. I mean, what I would say is, in all honesty, we and other providers of gas and, gas heating solutions are going to be making inroads into decarbonising that vector, but it's going to be, it's going to take some time. So the near term is going to be modest gains. And I think you're going to see most gains made in the sort of 30s and 40s, probably from the mid 30s onwards, I would say. The gas trading. So as is common practice, we, when I show the scope 3 emissions from the use of sold products, that is the gas that we sell to end users. It does not include traded gas. Traded gas it's just a financial transaction, and we can often be one amongst 6 different parties who are in that chain, all passing around the same molecule. So if you start to report those numbers, there's a huge risk of double counting. So we're quite clear, those numbers are to the end user where the emissions actually occur.
Thank you. And there's another question, again, from early on. What is the carbon intensity from your North Sea output versus imported gas? Is the UK expected still to import gas through to 2050? And does retreating from the North Sea mean global carbon emissions may rise?
Well, good questions. So the carbon intensity of our North Sea production, we benchmark very well. So if I just stick with Centrica and Spirit Energy, we actually benchmark very well against North Sea operators. And in general, North Sea or UK indigenous production is of a lower carbon intensity than global averages. Everything from sort of Qatari gas to US shale, for example, generally the UK is cleaner. There was a question there about if we pull away from North Sea. Yeah, so maybe the question was, if we wind down our production, is the carbon intensity of our gas going to increase? I'm not putting words in your mouth there, but
hi there. Sorry, can I jump in here? Yeah. Sorry, it's Dominic from Barclays. This is my question. No, I think it's not necessarily Centrica, because clearly your emissions are going to fall. The question I've got is that if we're still importing gas in the UK through the energy transition period, and you're prematurely retreating from the North Sea with a low carbon output in a low carbon basin, are we not at a risk actually of creating more carbon on a global basis as we import dirty carbon from elsewhere, whilst yours and the UK's carbon output actually falls? So sorry about the jumping in there.
No, thank you, Dominic, for doing that. Thank you.
Yeah, no, very helpful. Thank you. So, yeah, there is a risk. Absolutely, I'll be honest. There is a risk of that. But that risk is actually quite well recognised and is driving quite a lot of work on basically tagging volumes of gas, imported gas, with a carbon intensity, almost like carbon labelling for gas. And we are in conversation with various parties on that. And I think that we're watching that very closely. I think that is going to emerge as a way to try and address that very risk that you mentioned. We need to understand what is the relative carbon intensity of, for example, gas from Norway versus gas from US shale. And so we will monitor that very closely. And I think that's going to feed into sort of things like carbon border adjustments. You can see that coming down the line. So I think your hypothesis is right. There is that risk, but we're in discussion, certainly with parties, about how possibly the industry can mitigate that risk. And that'll be a great way to price carbon on those sort of dirtier imports, if you will.
So sorry if I jump in again, and then I'll leave you in peace. And if you're going to be leaving assets in the ground in the North Sea as you close and no longer invest, surely the UK and the globe would be better off if those assets are just operated by somebody else outside of Centrica. And clearly, well, if I extrapolate that, these assets should be owned by someone else at some point. Is that the direction of travel that will be for a holistic best case solution?
Okay, I'm glad you made that question or clarity, because to be clear, so we are winding down those reserves. So we intend to extract the recoverable reserves from our North Sea assets to the point where those existing reserves are, commercially spent, if you will. So we're not actually leaving anything in the ground. We want to maximize the production of those assets, frankly, for shareholder value, but also for, everything you just explained, as well as domestic energy security. What we're not going to do, though, as a company, is to deploy more capital to undertake more exploration of new reserves. So hopefully that we will be decommissioning and extract all the gas and then decommission all of the hardware in a responsible way.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, Dominic. We have a question from Divya Dipankar from Jupiter Asset Management. What is Centrica's capital allocation alignment strategy to meet its climate transition plan? Where do you see well, there are two questions, actually. So how are you allocating capital? And then the second one is, what do you see the biggest challenges to your transition plan as being?
Okay. So the capital allocation question, it is a good one. And we've had a number of conversations with investors on this recently. So as our climate transition plan states, if we do everything that we say we want to do in the plan, in the next 5 years, we will see our capital allocation into what we can class as green activities and assets as per the EU sustainability taxonomy, swing from under 5% to 50% of our capital allocation. So, and another way of looking at that is we will sort of, if it all goes to plan, we will sort of peak investment in, let's say, carbon intensive assets by around 2025, because we would have got 50% green, if you will, and then grow from there. And I always say, when I'm sort of asked, people say, can you commit to align your capital allocation with your targets? I mean, I would say that's exactly what we're doing. We intend to deliver on these targets. Therefore, our capital allocation will absolutely line up with and actually drive delivery of the target. So I think the fact that we're swinging from sort of 5% or so to hopefully 50% in the next 5 years is a pretty rapid swing, and I would argue is sort of in line with good practice.
Before we come back to the challenges question, could I just you've referred to the taxonomy, and there's obviously some debate about whether how gas is going to be viewed in a UK taxonomy. Does Centrica have a view on whether a gas should be regarded as green or as not green, and does it make any difference to you?
Yeah. It could make a difference to us, of course, with regard to what is considered an acceptable and credible way to categorize certain investments. Because, as people will know, the EU have debated this long and hard, and both gas and nuclear, indeed. And of course, they gave a concession to gas in their current taxonomy, but with some pretty stringent strings attached, very low carbon intensity thresholds, for example, for any gas asset. Now, many of you will have read recently that the UK government are thinking favourably, looking at gas as a transition fuel and perhaps, recognising gas as perhaps greener maybe than the EU did. Now, I think our view is, and we've not engaged government on this yet, gas is absolutely a transition fuel. We've been quite clear about that. It is necessary in certain circumstances, a necessary part of the move to a lower carbon future. So I think we do need to recognise it as a transition fuel. It's got to come back to, what do the government want the taxonomy to do, frankly? If it is going to be used to verify that a sort of a green fund is really green, then they've got to sort of make their decision in that context. And for us, we will. What I've just told you aligns with the EU's very stringent taxonomy. So any recognition of gas being a transition fuel will actually just make our numbers probably a little better, to be honest. But we're not currently advocating on that. I think government needs to think long and hard about what they want it to do as a tool.
Thank you. Well, I certainly don't want to turn it into a taxonomy call because everyone's had plenty of those. Let's come back to Divya's question. Just highlighting to people that we'll finish on time. So we've got 5 minutes to go. Please do add any further questions you may have. What do you see as the biggest challenges to your transition plan?
Biggest challenge. I mean, one thing I would say is as I alluded to earlier, that there is a huge uncertainty to the energy transition and indeed the world's transition to a hopefully a net zero state. So making decisions, placing bets in the face of significant uncertainty is a challenging concept in itself. I think what probably keeps me awake at night more than anything is just the multiple moving parts and the multiple actors that need to play their role in that customer scope 3 space. I'm less worried about Centrica's emissions, our scope 1, 2. Where the challenge lies, I think, is the fact that, we very carefully seek to invest and progress in step with government policy, technology learning curves, cost curves, our customers' ability to adopt technologies. We've got to get all these things right. Go too early and it can be costly. Go too late and you can be left behind. So we've got to get the timing right. And yet the timing, can only be really determined based upon a whole bunch of signals coming in. One from government, as I say, one from the OEMs producing the equipment that we install, another one from the producers of the clean fuel, another one from the customer themselves. So there's a lot of moving parts in there. So I think the biggest challenge is about getting the customers to decarbonize. Now, I think we can play a great role in that insofar as we just know our customers so well. And equally, I think we have a good relationship with all the other actors I just mentioned. So we're just trying to be active on all fronts. But yeah, it's a big challenge.
I've got one final question, which we're going to just squeeze in ahead of the hour, from Connor Constable at Perk. Welcomes the fact that the transition plan has an emphasis on just transition, and asks whether this extends to upstream suppliers. So does the company attribute risk on a country-by-country basis and have a process in place to reduce exposure to sourcing from higher risk regions?
Yes, so it does. It does absolutely apply to our upstream supply base. So, as I mentioned before, we have a responsible sourcing sort of strategy in place. We have a suppliers charter. We look to partner with organizations that basically live to the same values that we do around social and environmental protection. That's our starting point. Some of the technologies that we need to procure to enable the transition, such as solar and indeed batteries, are associated with supply chains that can be quite high risk. Solar, the production of polysilicon, can be associated with not only environmental issues, but forced labor. We have quite sophisticated processes in place that assess any of our supply chains, we have a coarse filter process where a certain sector, a certain product, a certain country, an industry will be flagged depending upon its controversy or depending upon its risk profile. That will then lead us to do more detailed analysis of the supplier if needed, and ultimately will lead to in-country due diligence and auditing. And the just transition aspect of that is very much it's not just about the environment, of course. It is about trying to ensure that there's no forced labor, modern slavery, bribery, corruption, all of those things we need to manage in the supply chain. More than happy to have a more detailed call with the questioner if they wanted to.
Jim, that's very kind. And I think that really encapsulates one of the things that I've seen most on this call. I mean, this does strike me as this is an unfolding dynamic, which is going to unfold with lots of moving parts over a number of years. It's great to have the conversation started. It's great to have so many investors participating in it. And so I'd like to thank you, but also particularly your colleagues you've maybe been the front man, but also Abby, Martin and Sam for getting the whole thing underway and putting so much of the material together. I'd like to thank Lucy and Kathy for, again, getting everyone into the same Zoom space together, to invite investors to contact either Martin and the team Investor Relations with any follow-up questions, or indeed Lucy and Kathy with any ideas of other companies you'd like to see presenting in this way. But thanks very much for introducing us to your thinking on this point. And thank you all very much for your time.
Thank you, Mike. Thanks all for joining.
Have a good day, everybody.
Thanks all. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.